Steve, last time I was on, we did not get a chance to talk about this topic. So I want to make sure that we cover it today, right? There was an article from December 18th, 2016, from the New York Times, okay? And they talked about the history of the New York Life Insurance Company, the history of the New York Life Insurance Company and its ties to slavery. Now, in the past on this show, we've talked about some corporations that have tied to slavery. We talked about railroad companies. We talked about life insurance companies, banks, things like this, right? This is an extensive article written by Rachel L. Swartz, and she did an excellent job with this, all right? So, now, let me say from the outset, this is not an attack on the New York Life Insurance Company. If you have an insurance policy with the New York Life Insurance Company, I'm not telling you to cancel it. I'm not telling you to cuss them out or anything like this. Okay, I'm dealing with history. What you do is up to you. All right. So the New York Life Insurance Company started out as the Nautilus Mutual Life Insurance Company in the spring of 1845, and their first address was at 58 Wall Street in New York. Wall Street in New York. Okay, and the board of trustees was made up by some of the city's wealthiest merchants, bankers, and railroad magnates. All right. Now, just so people understand, when you study the history of New York, right, and the city of New York, New York used to be called New Amsterdam. Before it was a British colony, it was a Dutch colony called New Amsterdam, and the Dutch were bringing Africans as slaves into that colony in the 1620s. And they're going to force the enslaved African people to build a wall at the northern portion of the colony, okay? And that is where the Wall Street gets its name from. That wall that was built is going to then become a British colony called New York, okay? Because you had an old York in Britain, in England, and this is New York, okay? This is where we get these names from. New England, Newark is actually spelled Newark, but we pronounce it Newark, New Jersey, okay? And the first commodity traded on Wall Street were African slaves. Okay, so during 1845, we know that slavery is in full effect. It's in, it had been outlawed in the state of New York in 1827. You're still going to have it in a few northern states, but you're going to have it in the South, okay? So when they start this Nautilus Mutual Life Insurance Company, sales were sluggish the first year. So what the company did was, for growth, they turned to the South. They looked at the South. Now, in Richmond, Virginia, there was an enterprising New York life insurance agent who sold more than 30 policies in a single day in February of 1846. Because of this, soon you're going to start having advertisements that began appearing in newspapers from Wilmington, North Carolina to Louisville, Kentucky, advertising this New York-based company, and it encouraged Southerners to buy insurance policies to protect their most precious commodity, their slaves. So the reason why this was important is because prior to this, when you had, or prior to insurance companies doing this, when you had a slave that would die, then the value of the slave was lost. Okay, the slaves alive were a white man's most prized assets, and Dr. Claude Anderson talks about this a lot in Black Labor White Wealth. But when they were dead, they were virtually worthless. So what life insurance did was it changed this equation and allowed slave owners to recoup 3/4 of a slave's value in the event of their untimely death. All right. Now, prior to this, you're going to
3/4 of the value.
Yeah, 3/4 of the value. Yes. Yeah. And so they would take out insurance policy, pay the monthly premiums, things like this, whatever it was, quarterly, whatever it was, pay the premiums, and this allowed them to recoup money on their enslaved Africans. Okay. I know we're coming up on a break here, so we're going to continue this on the other side of the break.
This has bothered me, especially with Trump's choice for SEC chair.
Well, Mnuchin? Oh no, no, not Mnuchin. He just announced this.
He just announced it
Well,
yesterday.
Trump is surrounding himself with millionaires and billionaires who've gamed the system, so they can continue to game the system. He's putting the fox in charge of the hen house, and some of these people he is appointing are opposed to the department that they're going to run.
And I don't see how you can put a fox in charge of the hen house.
Well, you have to look at Donald Trump.
When we look at New York life, when we get into this story,
Yeah.
because I've read this story,
Sure.
and it is disturbing.
Absolutely.
Every time I see one of the commercials on TV, I'm disturbed now.
Mm-hmm.
We'll be right back, ladies and gentlemen, with Michael Imhotep. It's Eat Radio Thursday. The African History
Network, yes.
HistoryNetwork.com.
AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, absolutely.
All right.
Check it out.
I want you to continue with your story. Ramonte, ask that caller to hold on a while longer. He's got to finish this because this really bothered me. An iconic U.S. company behaving this way.
Well, ain't the first one. But what I want to say is, and we talked about this during the break, the New York Life Insurance Company that exists today and the people that exist today, I don't think we should antagonize them, attack them, things like that. They can't change the history of the company. What we can hold them accountable for is how they deal with the history of the company, how they handle the history of the company, okay? And in this article, they talk about that. So once again, I'm not telling people, if you have policies with the New York Life Insurance Company, I'm not telling people to cancel your policies. I'm not telling you to call them and give them a piece of your mind, nothing like that. I'm dealing with history, okay? And there are other companies that have a similar history, and we need to study that history and then look at how the company deals with that history. It's up to you whether you engage with them or not, what have you, because there's a lot of them, all right? So this is an article from the New York Times, December 18th, 2016. Did not have a chance to get to this last time we were on. But the Knowledge Mutual Life Insurance Company is what they started out as 1845. And they're going to turn to the South and turn to selling policies on enslaved African people so that the slaveholders can recoup 3/4 of their investment in the slaves once the slave dies, okay? Now, the first president of the New York Life Insurance Company, his name was James DePester Ogden, okay? And he would later describe the American system of slavery and human bondage as evil. But by 1847, insurance policies on slaves accounted for 1/3 of the policies of the New York Life Insurance Company, okay? And the company would later become one of the nation's Fortune 100 companies. Now, on this show, we've talked about how Georgetown and Harvard University and how some other universities, Rutgers, have drawn national attention when their legacy of slavery has become exposed and how they have handled that history, okay, how they've acknowledged it and handled it, okay. We talked about, what was their university? I forget, it comes to me in just a minute. It's a Jesuit university. I forgot, we talked about it.
Loyola?
It wasn't Loyola, I think it was another one. But we talked about that also. Oh, no, it was Georgetown. It was Georgetown. We talked about Georgetown, 272 slaves that were sold. But slavery also generated business for some of the most prominent modern-day corporations, underscoring the ties that many contemporary institutions have to the history of slavery and the legacy of slavery. You have banks like J.P. Morgan Chase and Wells Fargo, and they absorbed smaller banks that allowed Southerners seeking loans to use their slaves as collateral and took possession of some of these slaves when the owners defaulted. And this is history. You know, this is where you get the 3/5 compromise of 1787 from, Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 of the U.S. Constitution, that talks about, for the purpose of apportionment and taxation, that 3/5 of the enslaved, 3/5 of the population of those in bondage, because they didn't even use the word slave in the U.S. Constitution. 3/5 of them in the original Constitution, the 13th Amendment is an amendment, but the original Constitution, they didn't even use the term slave. That 3/5 of the enslaved population would be counted. It doesn't say they were 3/5 of a human being, but they're trying to figure out, how do we count this population for the purpose of determining how many seats in the U.S. House of Representatives a particular state will have, but also how do we tax them, because they are an asset. So this was an asset that slave owners could use as collateral to get loans. Okay, so you have J.P. Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, banks that they absorbed allowed slave holders to use slaves as collateral, and then you have other insurance companies like Aetna Insurance and the U.S. Life Insurance Company. They also sold insurance policies to slaveholders as well, particularly those whose laborers engaged in hazardous work in mines, lumber mills, turpentine factories, and steamboats in the industrializing sectors of the South. So when you if you go to the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History, they have, when you go through their main exhibit, and they have the slave ship exhibit, things like this, and you come out on the other side and you see Harriet Tubman, and they have a display on the wall, and it lists all types of skills, trades, and crafts that African people had in this country from 1619 up until 1865. Okay, well, there are a total of 262 skills, trades, and crafts that are listed. All right, and that comes from the book The Other Slaves, written by James Newton, came out in 1978. And I know there are 262 at least, because they had a sign there that says you can't take pictures, so I spent an hour writing them down and then I numbered them. That's how I know the 262 at least. So when you study some of these, you find out that a lot of them were very dangerous. Okay, so you're going to have other insurance companies, and it's estimated that you have more than 40 firms or insurance companies, mostly based in the South, that sold policies on enslaved Africans, so that the slaveholders could recoup the investment in it. Now, the U.S. Life Insurance Company, which now is a subsidiary of AIG, declined to comment on the slave policy sales. Wachovia Bank, which is one of Wells Fargo's predecessor companies, has apologized for its historic ties to slavery, as has J.P. Morgan Chase and Aetna. Now, the New York Life Insurance Company survived. A lot of other companies did not survive, but the New York Life Insurance Company survived. However, its foray into the slave insurance business did not prove to be lucrative. The company ended up paying out nearly as much in death claims, about $232,000 in today's dollars. They paid out about as much in death claims as they received in annual payments. But in the span of about 3 years, they sold 508 policies, okay? And like I said, 1/3 of their policies early on were sold to slaveholders, to enslaved African people. And this was, the 508 policies they sold was more than Aetna and the U.S. Life Insurance Company combined, according to available records. Let's go to the phone lines. I have more information. I'm going to continue with this, but let's go to the phone lines because I don't want to keep the callers holding.
You got James.
Hey, James, how you doing?
Good morning, how are you?
All right.
Good, good. I totally agree with everything you say. I'm actually an African American agent in New York Life.
Okay.
There's about 1,200 of us nationwide. We actually have African American market and a vice president that's been over.
That's Eugene Mitchell. Eugene Mitchell is your vice president, right?
Eugene Mitchell.
Yes.
Information that you just shared is actually true.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to tell people that it's not true.
Right.
What I want to also say is that one of the things that attracts me to life, one is that we don't shy away from the history.
Right.
We tell the story, and we also tell the story of Philo Swain, which was the first African American agent ever that was hired by New York Life. Like, this was actually the treasure of one king, Swain.
Yeah.
The reason I'm saying this is because I want everybody to understand this. Insurance companies have made for years ago, a disservice to African American people.
Mm-hmm.
And with debit insurance companies formed by collective insurance policies, insurance companies actually didn't allow African Americans to have huge amounts of life insurance on them for years.
Right.
It wasn't until maybe the 70s where you could actually have more than $25,000 of life insurance. So it was a huge disservice. One of the things that drove me to New York Life is one is that the company's been in existence since like you said.
Right.
And unfortunately, during that time, there was a lot of things that happened that I'm not proud of, but that was just the way things were then. One of the things I am proud of now is that we actually knew what they were going to do. In other words, and now when I educate people, I tell people when I first meet a group of people, I'll let them know. I said insurance companies weren't always there for us like they are now. And the reason that I'm with the number one life insurance company in America is because they will do what they say they will do. They will pay if they say they will pay.
Right.
But I don't want to take away and try to say, oh, you're wrong and come down on you, because that is the history of America.
Right.
You know,
Right. Exactly.
Moving forward, I want people to realize that we need to take advantage of these economic tools, because the twist of that, and I totally
No,
agree,
it's an AM
is
Superstation.
that people use insurance as collateral.
Mm-hmm.
People use insurance to grow businesses. People use insurance to buffer a negative and turn it into a positive.
Right.
And that's the thing that I try to teach people now. Say, look, take advantage of these tools. They're available. What we've been prone to is we got disrespected and discounted for so long that we're like that little elephant that with the pig. And now we're afraid to actually say, I'm worth this amount of money, or I'm worth this amount of money, or my family's worth this amount of money, or I need to have a buy-sell agreement in place for my business. I need to have that insurance person just as much as I need to have that CPA and that attorney. The way of the world, the way of wealth, the way of true wealth is actually acquiring a lot of these assets and utilizing them
Right.
in the benefit of the good. So
Right.
I applaud you for actually saying all of these things, because I hope people call and ask questions, because I would love to entertain them. I will try to get in touch with Eugene, and maybe you can have him have a conversation with you directly.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Phone number.
That'd be good. Because because Eugene Mitchell as well as Maggie Anderson, they were on News One Now with Roland Martin, and New York Life has partnered with the Empowerment tour with Maggie Anderson. Maggie Anderson wrote the book Our Great Year, Our Black Year, that talked about.
Have both of them on speed dial.
Right.
We had one of those summits here in Detroit. We had it actually at Reverend Flowers Church.
When was this?
Kenneth Tower. This was in 2014.
Okay.
It wasn't publicized as well as this.
Yeah. Nobody called me, man. They should.
They want to come back.
Okay.
And I can actually arrange that, because
we need to make that happen.
Here in Michigan.
Yeah, we need to connect. We need to make that happen.
Can I leave you my phone number?
Leave it with our producer. Leave it with our producer, Tony.
And I would love to do that, but Maggie and I'm traveling. I'm going to Atlanta in February to meet with Maggie. And,
Or a board up.
so,
okay. Yeah. Leave it. Can you get his number?
Yeah,
Tony?
tell him don't hang up.
Huh?
Don't
hang up. Don't hang up. They'll get your number, okay? And get his email address also.
I got you, my brother.
Okay, man. Thanks. I appreciate it. And like I said, I'm not telling people to cancel their policies with New York Life Insurance, anything like that. We're done with the history. There are other companies that have ties to slavery as well. Lehman Brothers. We know railroads. J.P. Morgan Chase. Let's see, Wachovia Corporation. We know it's a number of Norfolk Southern Railroad. So you have a lot of them. So the most important thing, I think, is how they handle that legacy, not necessarily what happened in the past, but how they handle the past. And New York Life Insurance Company has been one of those companies that has been upfront about their past. Okay, all right. So now what's happened is that you have descendants of some of these enslaved Africans who had life insurance policies taken out on them. Some of these descendants were recently identified by the New York Times and are coming to terms with the realization that one of the nation's biggest insurance companies sold policies on their ancestors
one more thing. Can I
and
get your email
hundreds
address?
of other enslaved laborers as well. Okay, now policy number 447. Policy number 447 was covered an enslaved African man named Nathan York. Nathan York, and he was a slave who toiled in the Virginia coal mines, where the earth often collapsed on its subterranean workforce. So the coal mines were very dangerous work. The railroads were very dangerous work. Oftentimes, what would happen is that slave owners would loan their slaves out to corporations that own coal mines, for very dangerous work that build railroads, all types of things like this. Okay, working on steamboats, they will loan them out and get paid to loan out their enslaved Africans. Okay. You have policy number 1141. Policy number 1141 insured a slave known as Warwick, Warwick, who fed the fiery furnaces on a Kentucky steamboat. Very dangerous work also. Policy number 1150 covered Anthony, an enslaved African named Anthony, who labored amid the whirling blades of a sawmill in North Carolina. Very, very dangerous work as well.
All right, cool.
Okay.
So, information.
As the caller called in, the New York Life Insurance Company hired one of the insurance industry's first African American agents in 1957. African Americans currently account for 13% of the New York Life Insurance Company's employees, including its senior vice president for governmental affairs. His name is George Nichols III, who reports directly to the chief executive. Okay. Now, handwritten records of sales, insurance premiums, and expenditures, many described in the article for the first time from the New York Times, illuminate the inner workings of a company born before the Civil War. So Civil War, 1861-1865. This company started 20 years before the Civil War started in 1845. Now, that history has stirred anxiety among some New York Life insurance executives who take pride in their multiracial workforce and customer base. They worry that the news coverage about the company's ties to slavery may overshadow their efforts to provide philanthropic support to the African American community. Okay, so for example, New York Life Insurance Company donates millions of dollars annually to causes and groups that benefit African Americans. George Nicholas III, executives for the New York Life Insurance Company pointed to a $10 million endowment to the Colin Powell Center for Policy Studies at the City College of New York, sponsorship of the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and other initiatives. Okay. In 1949, the Nautilus Mutual Life Insurance Company changed their name to the New York Life Insurance Company. Okay. So a statement from Kevin Hine, who's a spokesman for the New York Life Insurance Company, said, quote, "We profoundly regret that in the 1840s, our predecessor company, Nautilus Insurance Company, insured the lives of slaves for a brief period of time. While we cannot change our history, our long-standing recognition of it has helped shape our commitment in the African American community." Now, the company's connections, that's quote unquote, now the company's connections to slavery drew attention in the early 2000s as California and more than a dozen localities, among them Chicago, Philadelphia, and San Francisco, began to require companies to disclose their slavery-era activities. The disclosure laws emerged in response to African American activists and attorneys who pressed for reparations and a public reckoning with history. Okay. Now, a lawsuit filed against the New York Life Insurance Company and other companies tied to slavery was dismissed in 2004 after a judge ruled that the African American plaintiffs had established no clear link to the businesses they sued and that the statute of limitations had run out more than a century ago. But a lot of when you apply for a lot of government contracts, and I used to manage a company, and we had contracts with the county of Wayne, and when you fit out the bid form, one of the questions that's asked is, did your company exist prior to, I think it's prior to 1865, and did your company profit from slavery or have ties to slavery, something like that, okay? And that type of language in government contracts, a lot of that comes from that lawsuit, those lawsuits in the 2000s, okay? Now, New York Life Insurance executives found the old records of slave policies in a storage room that served as an informal archive on the 16th floor of their headquarters, a trove of fraying ledgers and yellowing documents. They turned over the names of slave and slave holders as required by law and donated several of the accounting books to the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, where they are available to the public today. The company stored the rest in a private corporate archive. Now, you have some historians that say, well, just because they only did this, they only sold slave policies for the first 3 years, and just because they did not really make a profit on it, that's not the end of the story, okay? The reason why is because they were able to use that to get into the South and gain more market share and sell insurance policies to other people also, all right? All right, so now there's some other companies that have benefited from, well, we talked about that briefly. Check out the article from AtlantaBlackStar.com. 16 major corporations you never knew profited from slavery. 16 major corporations you never knew profited from slavery. That's from AtlantaBlackStar.com.
Was Coca-Cola one of those? Or they
no,
were way after slavery?
No, I haven't seen anything from Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola was created after slavery ended.
Okay.
If I remember correctly, they were created after slavery. It was like late 1800s, something like that. They were created, if I remember correctly. But I haven't seen anything where Coca-Cola's ties to slavery.
All right. You know, I thought that was an interesting segment
Yes.
that you completed, especially with the call-in from New York Life.
Yes.
Until he started making it a commercial for New York Life. Next time you call in, dude, you're paying.
Yeah, contact Steve Hood, man. You all can advertise here on the show.
Yeah, reparations through Steve Hood. Pay for this past sins. Pay for your past sins.
Right.
But, Michael,
Yeah.
when I read that article in the New York Times, I don't know, it just drove home.
Mm-hmm.
It drove home how badly we were treated. And
Absolutely.
it somehow, in some ways, it gives credence to your argument that Talladega should not show up at the inauguration.
Well, I wonder what Donald Trump would say about this. I dare Donald Trump to say something about this. I wonder what Donald Trump would say about this. Has Omarosa talked about this at all?
No.
She's
She's
supposed
just
to
talking
be-
about people getting on their knees
And
and begging for forgiveness
we-
from Donald Trump. I wonder if she had to do that.
we're going to leave that alone.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be right back on the other side with more of Michael Imhotep. It's our new schedule. We're keeping him on until 8:30.
Yes.